your daily fix of women's mixed martial arts from the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and ONE Championship. Be in the loop, cause Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your fix on women's MMA. We've got you covered on Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Arnel de Leon, and hopefully your day is going bueno. Wherever you are, whoever you are, hopefully your day is going bueno as we are persevering through yet another tough year. And I will say this right now, it's currently a tough day, because right now it is raining really hard in Los Angeles. Oh my goodness. We have been going through a series of thunder and rainstorms lately in the Los Angeles area, which is surprising because, Southern California, perfect weather, whatever. Today we're going to have huge rain and floods coming up, but the next day we're going to have good sunny skies. And then we're going to have rain again at a Saturday, which is ironically the day we're going to go have the UFC show, which is UFC 259, with Izzy Adesanya versus Jan Blachowicz. So, with this Saturday, major UFC show, and possible heavy rainstorm happening, looks like I gotta watch a show, maybe alone, because usually, with me and my friends, we go and we all come together, we go to a bar, or to a Buffalo Wild Wings, or to any location that has food and mixed martial arts. I love food, I love sports. Bring it all together. It's like the Super Bowl. You cannot have a sporting event without food and your buddies. So this Saturday, UFC 259. Hopefully it doesn't get as bad for the rainstorm and they'll allow indoor dining for Buffalo Wild Wings or for bars. Now, before you say, well, social distancing, you got to be aware of your distance towards other people. Well, guess what? In Los Angeles area, things are kind of being stabilized. They're being normalized right now, where you can go walk around Los Angeles, walk around the malls, and things seem pretty normal. The cases right now of people being sick during this whole lockdown period, it's been dropping. It's been dropping. Even churches are allowing elderly people to come to church now because we are at a point now where things are reopening up. Texas is at the phase right now of officially reopening up and preventing this whole lockdown procedures. Now, obviously, we're going to wear masks. We're going to go and get heat check and heat tests, which is completely understandable. But Los Angeles, other than the heavy rainstorm happening right now outside, things are going pretty bueno here in LA in terms of overall health and safety concerns. And so, with that being said, I want to talk about a specific fighter here for today's podcast. And this is absolute insanity, what I'm seeing here. And it's a bout between Victoria Lee and Sunisa Srisen. It is an atomweight MMA bout for ONE Championships. And the reason why I'm saying it's insanity is because there's no way you could ever see this happening in the States in a major MMA organization. It's because Victoria Lee is a 16-year-old prodigy making her mixed martial arts debut as the opening bout for a major ONE Championship event. ONE Championship is arguably the largest MMA organization in the world, at least in terms of the east side. What largest Western organization in the world in MMA? UFC. East side, it is ONE Championships. And you can argue ONE Championship is bigger than ONE Championship is bigger than the UFC because China, because the Asian demographic is a lot more larger than the Western demographic. You can say that. So you can arguably say that Victoria Lee, 16-year-old girl, is making her MMA debut in the largest mixed martial arts organization in the entire world. How is that not the most pressure-biting thing ever? It's huge pressure. Insane pressure for a 16-year-old. Can you imagine if the UFC were to... Because right now, we have, prospects in the UFC right now, like Maria Agapova and, Mackenzie Dern, Amanda Ribas. Those girls are... Their range is between their early 20s to late 20s. Early to late 20s. Because it's been proven through analytics, through hockey, football, baseball, basketball, that the peak version, the peak athlete, the best physical version of yourself comes in at around the age of 28. But in MMA, the best version of these fighters comes in their like early to mid, sometimes even late 30s. Heck, we're seeing the best version of Khabib Nurmagomedov in his last bouts against Gaethje and his run in his 30s. He's like 30 years old when he fought against Conor McGregor. And then like he was in his early 30s when he fought against Gaethje, and like Poirier, like this guy went through his peak in his early 30s. Meanwhile, Daniel Cormier, he didn't make his MMA debut till he was late 30s. And then we got fighters like Yoel Romero. Israel Adesanya, we're seeing the best version of him, and he's 32 years old. John Jones, he's a fighter that generally most people can accept the fact that he hasn't even reached his full peak potential yet. Like he's in his early mid 30s. Matt Nunes, early to mid 30s. Valentina Shevchenko, early to mid 30s. They are in the best prime of their lives, and they're only in their 30s. Now compare that to somebody like Victoria Lee, who is 16 years old. And the build-up for this fight was, I find it very amusing, honestly, where we have Victoria Lee versus Sunisa Srisen. And Sunisa Srisen here, she is booked as if, in terms of the presentation, from Michael Chilson, from Chetri Sititong, from Michael Chiavello. They're all like, Sunisa Srisen here, she is the proper veteran in this fight. She has to use all her years of experience. She has more time in fighting. She is a proper journeyman, a veteran of the sports. And then they show the graphics card, and Sunisa Srisen is only 20 years old. And that's why I'm like, Victoria Lee is a prodigy. And I'm like, is this a battle between two prodigies here? We got Victoria Lee, who currently is a high schooler. She's currently a junior. She's starting off her junior in high school. She's 16. Sunisa Srisen is maybe a year and a half, 2 years away, like a year and a half, 2 years off from graduating from high school. These two girls are incredibly young. But the build-up is like, Sunisa Srisen here, proper journeyman, veteran fighter here, has to use all the years and experience which she has over Victoria Lee, but there's only like 4-year difference in terms of age. And Srisen started training before the age of 14. So the prodigy part is like, it blows my mind. And note, Victoria Lee, she is the younger sister of current ONE Championships atomweight MMA champion in Angela Lee. And Angela Lee is only 24 years old. The ages for these female fighters are incredibly young. Even Meng Bo, who's like only in her like late 20s, is considered like, this girl is like a proper veteran in the of the division, of the atomweight division. I'm like, what do you mean she's not even a veteran? She's not even 30 yet. Like, all these women are so incredibly young, and we're not even seeing the best versions of themselves. And they're going out there competing in a large stage like ONE Championship. It's amazing. And so going to this fight here, first of all, I was like, oh my goodness, I could never handle that pressure, man. You think like LeBron James or like Zion Williamson or any like LaMelo, Lonzo Ball, you think they had to deal with pressure? I know like LaMelo Ball had to deal with a lot of pressure. A young basketball player who had like millions of followers at the age of like 14, 15 years old. Alright then. But he never made it to the big stage until he was 18. This girl here, 16. And also, when they're talking about Victoria Lee here, strangely enough, when they're doing the preview of this fight, Sunisa Srisen, she gets her big entrance. Like, she gets the big entrance, all the lights, she got like the huge graphics in, and it's like, you can hear Michael Chiavello being like, Sunisa Srisen here, look at her. She is dancing on her way to the cage. I don't know why she's doing that. And then, before she even makes it inside the actual cage, we then get a video hype package of Victoria Lee. And what I found amusing about that was that Sunisa Srisen doesn't even get a video hype package. Before the fight, we see the graphics card between Srisen and Lee, and then we get this like 15-second hype package of Victoria Lee. Man, Victoria Lee, you know, like he's like former champion, doing all this, you know, great fighter here. You have an interview. They compare her to Angela Lee. So it's like, here's the matchup card. Here's a 15-second hype package for Lee. Srisen entrance. Srisen before she gets to the cage. We get yet another hype package that goes on for a minute and a half for Victoria Lee, and they're like, Victoria Lee is this girl who's got a higher ceiling, more potential than already the current atomweight champion in her older sister in Angela Lee. And you have like the talking heads talking about like, yeah, Victoria Lee, she is special. She is better. She's actually better than her older sister, who's currently the world champion. Also, Victoria Lee is better as a striker. She's better as a grappler. She's better as a wrestler. Like Victoria Lee has all the tools to become like the best ever. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is absolute insane pressure. If Victoria Lee were to lose this fight, which she did end up losing, she ended up winning her bout. In a struggle in her bout, obviously. This is her first MMA bout. But there is so much pressure for this one girl to go in there, and then as she is making her entrance after the hype package goes off, with the talking heads being like, yeah, Victoria Lee, like she's the best ever. We then have Michael Chiavello talking about how awesome Victoria Lee is, and then we see a graphics card. The graphics card compares Victoria Lee to LeBron James, Serena Williams, Mike Tyson, and David Beckham. Now, he's talking about it in terms of like, look at these athletes made their debut at a super young age. Like Serena Williams, she came to the sport at the age of 14. Look at her now. Look at Victoria Lee. She's coming into the sport at the age of 16. She's gonna be an all-time great, like those other athletes over there. So yeah, Victoria Lee, immediately compared to LeBron James, David Beckham, Mike Tyson, and Serena Williams. And then, if that's not enough, remember, this is the first fight of the entire show. The first one. We have Michael Chiavello saying, actually, if you really think about it, Victoria Lee has more pressure to succeed and is given more tools to be successful in her career compared to any of them, because Victoria Lee is the younger sister of two other MMA world champions. Because her older brother is an MMA world champion who ended up defeating his opponents in under 26 seconds, while Angela Lee ended up defeating her opponent in her debut in under 30 seconds. And so Michael Chiavell's like, yeah, none of those athletes were ever siblings to somebody who is world champion material, proven and dominated in her sports. Victoria Lee here, expect her to dominate in her debut also, and expect her to go for a 20-second knockout, and Victoria Lee's the best ever. And I'm just like, wow, there is so much hype for this girl. And also note though, her team, her corner crew, is her family. She's got her coaches, she's got her dad as one of her coaches, she's got her sister there. So her family is pretty much managing and running her career. And in the post-fight presser, you get when Victoria Lee was doing her interview, she's like, yeah, I struggled the first round, but then my dad came over and my dad was telling me what to do, and the pressure is absolute insanity. It really is. She's only 16 years old, and before you say, well, it's a cultural thing, their culture, no. She's from America. Both Angela Lee and Victoria Lee are Americans. They're Americans who are also from Singapore. So they're Singaporean, they're Asian Americans. That's what they are. That's why when I saw in Victoria Lee and Angela Lee's high packages, they speak perfect, full-on clear English. So they are so they're Asian American. They are Asian Americans. They are going into ONE Championships and then they go back to school in America. Angela Lee, the reason as to why she became an MMA fighter was because she watched a bunch of Ronda Rousey fights. It's true. If you read up the interviews, and you watch interviews of Angela Lee, she always says that her main goal, her main dream, is to become a UFC fighter, to become a UFC women's champion. But the opportunity never came about, so instead she went towards ONE Championships. And considering how high the stock is for Angela Lee, who is arguably the best women's fighter in their entire roster, I say that arguably because Zhang Jinan is right up there, as you can argue, who's really best, Zhang Jinan or Angela Lee? Those two are the women to think about in terms of who are the best fighters from ONE Championships. So Angela Lee, she has expectations to one day dropping the ONE Championship belt and end up going to UFC. Meanwhile, we have other fighters out there, whether it be Tiffany Teo, Mangbo, or heck, Stan Fairtex, who are all in their 20s, who can all make the jump to the UFC or in the Western MMA organizations and dominate over there. there is so much hype and so much promise and so much potential from ONE Championship in their female fighters that it's going to be really hard to see someone like Victoria Lee be able to live up to that standard. But apparently, there are a lot of people who see Victoria Lee being somebody with an incredibly high ceiling, with even higher expectations and standards than even those women. You're listening to the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast. Come back after a short break here as I discuss Victoria Lee versus Sunisa Srisen. See you soon.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info. Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And we're back. You're listening to the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast. I'm discussing the battle between the Prodigies. See, Prodigies because one of them is only 20 years old, but apparently one of them is considered the actual Prodigy here. And Victoria Lee versus Sunisa Srisen, a 16-year-old versus a 20-year-old. The opening bout for ONE Championships Fist of Fury event. So, Sunisa's only 20 years old, but she's being talked about as if she's like the oldie veteran here compared to Victoria Lee. Only 4-year difference. Whatever. So I'm reading my notes here, and the two merely just throw bombs at each other. Throwing bombs, they're being proper headhunters. No leg kicks, no body shots. Just both of them throwing out haymakers to the head of one another. Victoria Lee clinches with Sunisa and trades knees. Lee's attempting a head and arm throw, but Sunisa ends up pulling off the head and arm throw herself. So she slams Victoria Lee. Lee attempts a head and arm triangle, but the two, as they get up though, Sunisa lands a clean head kick onto Victoria Lee, and then the fight just slows down in terms of spacing. Victoria Lee came in all guns a-blazing, being the one who's initiating all the action, the one initiating with her activity, high activity from Victoria Lee. But then, after the takedown slam from Srisen, who was a striker in this bout here, after Srisen slams Lee, Lee kind of slows down here, trying to readjust herself, and it leads to a couple of clean shots from Sunisa Srisen, landing to the head of Victoria Lee. So after the head kick, Lee is trying to go clinch with Sunisa again, but is being pelted over and over again on the face by Sunisa. She gets within clinching range, finally, of Srisen. Lee gets a clinch in and gets a head and arm throw, finally, after 2.5 minutes into the bout. Lee gets onto the back mount and tries to go for a rear naked choke and lays in some forearm smashes from back mount position. So it leads to 2.5 straight minutes of Victoria Lee doing ground and pound action and trying to go and sink in a rear naked choke on Sunisa Srisen for the latter half of the first round. But Srisen was able to avoid being submitted, avoid the ground pound action, and it leads to the first round ending. So who won the first round? Well, in ONE Championships, it's not judged by a round per round basis, but it's judged by fight totality, but it's strange to account for that. So in my scorebook, sir, I picked Sunisa Srisen winning the first round. I am a firm believer that if you do get taken down, but you're not sustaining that much damage, then you shouldn't be pelted with like negative points. But I'm also a firm believer of ground control. So Victoria Lee, for the second half of this bout here, controlled her opponents. But in the first half, it was Sunisa Srisen here dominating Victoria Lee in the striking. Like if you show like the fight stats of the first half of who was winning that in the striking category, even in the grappling category of the clinching and the slam and the takedown. Yes, Victoria Lee was able to get off from bottom position immediately in the first half when Srisen took her down, but Srisen did get a takedown in. She did land a head kick, landed a lot more clean-looking shots, did a lot more better in striking, find better angling. So Srisen won the first half, Victoria Lee won the second half. So we then go to the second round here. So for the second round, Lee has a really good stepping jab, she has one really good stepping jab, but as she's doing her stepping jab, her inability to have proper head movements does really show here. As she goes in for a stepping jab, gets a clean shot in onto the face of Sunisa Srisen. Srisen is able to, though, go land a 3-punch combination onto Victoria Lee after Victoria Lee gets the clean jab in. So I put here, yes, Victoria Lee's jab is really good, but she's being opened up a lot after she does the jab. So she's eating a whole lot of shots to the face. Lee clinches in with Sunisa because she does a step-in jab, which allows her to get within range of clinching on Sunisa Srisen. So Victoria Lee clinches with her, brings her into the ground yet again with a slam. Lee gets on back mount immediately, very clean, and she sinks in a rear naked choke for a submission victory. So the winner of the bout here goes to Victoria Lee via submission rear naked choke in the second round. Congratulations for Victoria Lee. And so Victoria Lee, in her MMA debut at the age of 16, was able to defeat Sunisa Srisen. One thing to know about this bout here was the fact that Victoria Lee's stand-up is very questionable. Very, very questionable. And in the hype package, they showed what Victoria Lee's win condition was that she was going to go in for a step-in jab and then make her opponent uncomfortable in the striking. And as her opponent is trying to go for a counter hit, that's when Victoria Lee goes in for a clinch and either goes for a leg trip or for a slam. But once again, she's only 16 years old here, so of course, she's not the perfect fighter. But as I'm making my criticisms of Victoria Lee here, this is what I found. Victoria Lee, as she's going in for the clinch, she's leaving herself wide open for clean strikes. And if she were to fight somebody like Tiffany Teo or Meng Bo, there are real possibilities that as Victoria Lee is going in for the step-in jab, and then she extends both of her arms out for the clinch, and Victoria Lee, she was able to get away doing this on Srisen because she could go eat the punches of Sunisa Srisen here. She steps in jab, gets hit in the face 3, maybe 4 consecutive times just to go to the clinch in, and so she can go and get the takedown. I talk about this all the time in other fights here, where, specifically for someone like Carlos Esparza, where I would like it if grapplers and wrestlers are perfectly fine willing to go take a couple shots in to go and get the grapple and to go and get the win condition going. So in Victoria Lee's case here, she was willing to get punched in the face multiple times in order to go get within range to go grab Srisen and slam her to the ground and get a win condition down, which was a submission victory. So yeah, 2 thumbs up there for Victoria Lee. Meanwhile, there are some fighters like Tiffany Teo, Carlos Esparza, who is hesitant about doing that. She is one of those fighters who, if given 2 options, you can either get hit in the face and get the takedown in, or you can completely avoid getting hit in the face, but get the takedown in, but you get the takedown in later, much, much later in the fights. What do you choose? And as time goes on, we see this with other fighters like Chris Cyborg and Man Nunes when they are in a position where they can go and find the grappling and wrestle their opponents. They do this. They do this where they will try to find the perfect opening. They are not going to go to any situation where there's a possibility of themselves getting hit or knocked out or sustaining a lot of damage as they're going for a grappling exchange. So for Victoria Lee, I respect her in that she is brave enough to withstand all these tricks to the face here. But if she is going to do that, though, look, kind of like Khabib, there is not a single moment when Khabib does a takedown where he's not sustaining some damage to the face or getting leg kicked or getting hit in the face as he's going for a takedown. Now, there was a recent example of this where it was... I recently saw Chris Weidman versus Romero, but that's not the one I was looking for. Oh, Curtis Blades. So, in the bout between Curtis Blades and Derek Lewis, Blades shoots him for a takedown, and he gets uppercut in the face. He gets uppercut in the face, and he gets knocked out. Now, obviously, for atomweights, there is not that much punching power in the atomweight division. Of course, Victoria Lee, and there's a reason why Angela Lee, why she struggled competing against someone like Zhang Jinan in strawweight, but she did really well for herself in the atomweight division, and this normally does happen for a lot of atomweights who move up in weight class, whether it be Kay Hansen, who was an atomweight at Invicta, then moved up at strawweight, or Jinyu Frey, who was an atomweight champion in Invicta, moving up to strawweight. They have a tendency of struggling with the weight difference, and they do get overwhelmed by the striking. And so, from what I'm seeing from Victoria Lee here, she can get away with this. She can get away with putting herself in a bad position in order to go get the wrestling, to go get the takedown in, to go get the slam, to go for the ground pound, to go for the submission victory. She can get away with that. But she can get away with that only in the atomweight division and in some parts of the strawweight division. But as you move up, though, the problem with Angela Lee when she fought against Zhang Jinan at strawweight was because of that extra 15-pound difference. There was extra strength, extra energy being exerted in from Zhang Jinan, and Zhang Jinan came into the fight in the rematch at atomweight a lot more lighter and a lot more easier for Angela Lee to go and body her in the wrestling and the grappling. Angela Lee, she couldn't grapple with Zhang Jinan at strawweight, and let's hypothetically say this right now. If those two women were to fight like at flyweight or at bantamweight, there's absolutely no way Angela Lee could ever utilize or take advantage of her grappling. She really couldn't, because now you're dealing with like bigger women who can go have knockout power. And in the atomweight division, other than Meng Bo, I don't really see women like going out there and knocking out with like one punch power. I don't really see that. So right now, for Victoria Lee, she's kind of safe. She's kind of safe going for these clinches and getting pelted in the face. Now, obviously, you don't want to be pelted in the face, because being pelted in the face hurts, and she got pummeled a lot on Sunisa Srisen here. No, the issue is that as you move forward, as you get older, she's only 16 years old, atomweight, there's a real possibility that she can move up at some point at strawweight. And here's the thing, Victoria Lee and Angela Lee, they're both very big. They are obviously way bigger than their counterpart opponents in the atomweight division. That's why they are able to go and take advantage of these fighters here. There was like a 4-inch reach advantage and height differential between Sunisa Srisen and Victoria Lee. Like, even when they're matching up with one another in the center of the cage here, there's a huge, like, disparity in the height and in the size of Lee and Sunisa. But if Sunisa was just a little bit more bigger, and they were to fight like 15, 25 pounds over the weight class, there's no way Victoria Lee can get away with what he did here, with what she did here, though. I will also criticize, once again, I'm criticizing a 16-year-old girl. You know what, this is my job. I'm critical of fighters here, no matter what your age is. So for Victoria Lee here, not only is she leaving herself wide open for a series of strikes, but she needs to build muscle, to be honest with you, because in the first round, she was being ragdolled and manhandled by Sunisa Srisen here, despite the size differential. Sunisa Srisen easily was able to go and find better positioning in the clinch work in the first half of the first round. It reminds me a lot of like Megan Anderson, where even though Megan Anderson at featherweight is bigger than all her opponents, she can easily be pushed backwards with her back onto the cage, and then, or if she goes for a clinch battle with her opponent, like her, she just loses positions immediately. And that's how it is with Victoria Lee, where she gets the clinch in, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is a clinch. She's going to go and slam her down to the ground. And even Michael Schiavone was talking about it. He was like, oh man, the clinch work of Victoria Lee is really good. And then immediately, Sunisa Srisen reverses position on Victoria Lee. Victoria Lee loses her position. She then gets her leg tripped up, and then she gets slammed at ease, really, from Sunisa Srisen. And the fact that she can get slammed that easily from a fighter who isn't that adept in the grappling in the first place, like Srisen, makes you really question, alright then, here are the parts that Victoria Lee has to work on. A, she has to work on building muscle. B, she has to work on a lot of her strength training. And C, she has to be able to maintain position. Because, heck, even when she was on back mount on Victoria Lee, it was 2.5 minutes of her being on back mounts. And I can safely tell you this right now, that Victoria Lee's ground and pound really didn't do much on Srisen here. It really didn't. Sunisa Srisen, in the second round, the reason why she got caught easily was because of how quick and snap and how fast Victoria Lee's grappling and positional movement is on the ground. Not because of the ground and pound, not because, oh man, she was being overwhelmed by the striking from top to position from Victoria Lee. No, that wasn't the case. Victoria Lee out-grappled Sunisa Srisen. One thing I would like to see Victoria Lee going forward is her being able to be a better boxer. We've seen huge strides in her older sister in her boxing, where she went from like pure grappler to like striker who can go mix up some level changes into being a grappler, into just like, okay, she's confident enough to handle herself in a stand-up, and when she really does need to, she can go for the grappling. That's how Angela Lee is when she's evolved herself in her striking, in her MMA game. For Victoria Lee, it's an obvious case of, alright, your striking is very green. Your movement is very green because she was incredibly stationary in her striking with Sunisa Srisen. She moved also very slow. She was very flat-footed, very predictable. Even though it was very predictable, her grappling made up for it. But if she were to be like in a boxing ring, she would stand no chance against any other boxers out there at atomweights. And is that a red flag in her striking? Yeah, it is. But she can work on it. She's only 16 years old. She needs to work on her head movements, her footwork. She needs to stop being flat-footed. She has to be able to pull off more diverse moves other than a stepping jab. I like to see her go through level changes. She didn't throw a single body punch or a leg kick. She didn't mix it up all that much. She has to work on her strength training. She has to work on her ground pound action. She has to work on being able to clinch with her opponents. Those are some aspects of Victoria Lee's game that I want to see improve. She's only in high school, and she's only 16 years old. So when she graduates from high school from a year and a half or 2 years from now, she can focus a lot more of her time into the grappling, into the fighting, into developing that all-around MMA game that she really does need to develop. And the sky's the limit for her. She has a high ceiling. All that matters is she can go and put it all together and learn and develop her game. You're listening to the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast. Come back after the short break as I discuss more fights. See you soon.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play. This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And I'm back. You're listening to the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, and I'm going to discuss a UFC Fight Night fight that happened at Rosenstruck vs. Gaines event, which is Miranda Rosa versus Mayra Bueno Silva. And this fight here sparked a lot of controversy in this bout, and it made me question a couple things as it pertains to mixed martial arts. So Miranda Rosa versus Mayra Bueno Silva was a fight that ended via draw. It was a draw. The judges scored the fights, I think it was 29-28, Mayra Bueno Silva, 28-28, 28-28. So one out of the three judges scored it for Silva. The two other judges scored it as a draw, so it led to majority draw. Who was the better fighter in this fight? Mayra Bueno Silva. So what happened here was these two, they meet each other, and Bueno Silva is a complete monster. She is... Okay, so while Victoria Lee was clinching with her opponent in order to go slam her and like do some ground and pound, Mayra Bueno Silva here, she clinches with her opponent and throws up these high, arcing, flying knees from clinch position and like vicious forearm and elbow smashes. Wow. Bueno Silva's clinch game is up there among the best in the women's fight division. It is objectively really darn good and impressive. When you look at Bueno Silva's clinch work compared to Montana De Rosa, because De La Rosa, when she clinches with you, she's doing what Victoria Lee does, where she's trying to go slam to the ground, she's trying to go and grab onto your head and bring you over to the ground to go slam, or she's tilting over your head, or she's trying to go like dive in for a single leg, for a takedown, or she's trying to go push you in onto the cage so she can slowly work her way back down to the cage. She's trying to go for a back. Like, what Montana Rosa is doing with her clinching and her grappling is very traditional, very basic, what you expect off wrestlers to do. But Bueno Silva, though, when she clinches with you, she is not going to take you to the ground. She's not going to slam you. She's not going to grab you by the head. No, she will go clinch with you, then just go full on 100% full aggro mode on her opponents. And so that's what I like about Bueno Silva. She is one of those fighters who goes full on super aggro at a high, consistent level. And out of every fight that happened in the UFC Fight Night card, with Rosenstruck and Gaines being the main event, this was the fight that had the most activity. It had more activity than Jimmy Rivera and Pedro Munoz, and that fight went on an insanely high pace. The reason why Del Rosa and Bueno Silva, why this fight didn't end up being Fight of the Night, was because of the draw, because of the decision. And what happened was, both these fighters, they're squaring off, they're clinching with one another. I told you, Bueno Silva, when she clinches, she keeps you at bay, but she isn't going to push you towards a direction. So Silva clinches, does a flying knee, contacts with Del Rosa. Del Rosa, when she clinches to you, she brings you onto the cage, and we see how this works. Fighter clinches with their opponents. They then shoot in for a single leg takedown. Both fighters are then pressed up onto the cage, and Del Rosa is slowly bringing her opponent down. Bueno Silva, her back is onto the cage. You hear the referee, don't hold the fence, don't hold the fence, don't hold the fence. And then the fighter lets go the fence, which then leads to the offensive grappler going for an easy takedown, and they use some ground and pound action while the opponent's pressed up on the cage, and the person who's pressed up on the cage is trying to go use the cage as a way to go and sit themselves up. We've seen how this fight usually plays out, though. Now, what did happen in this fight was, instead of Bueno Silva letting go of the cage when the referee said, go off the fence, Del Rosa, she gets a takedown in. Bueno Silva uses the cage to hurl herself up and to prevent the full takedown from even happening. Which leads to the referee, hey, break it up, stop. Stops it, goes over and says, -1 point for Bueno Silva, because, you know what, that was right. It was right in the sense that Bueno Silva should not hold on to the fence. Alright then. What I disagree with is the fact that, was it worth giving her a -1 point? Was it worth it, though? Because in the first round, Bueno Silva was winning. She was winning that, and even if Del Rosa were to get a takedown in, it wouldn't be enough for the judges, and for how I see it, for Silva to go and not win that first round. Because as shown, because, it's the power of hindsight, as shown, even when Del Rosa takes down Mayra Silva, she just ground controls her. She's never in a position where, oh man, Bueno Silva, she's being threatened by a ground and pound, or she's being threatened by a rear naked choke, or she's being threatened by an armbar. Like, no. Bueno Silva, yeah, she struggles in standing up, but she's not in a position where she's going to be finished off the ground. What should have happened, though, was that the referee should be like, alright, no, stop the fight. Like, alright then, gives you a warning. And then they go to position as if Del Rosa went for a takedown. But that didn't happen. It didn't happen like that. Bueno Silva won the first round as expected. And the second round, Del Rosa gets a takedown in. Alright then, so Del Rosa wins the second round. Third round, the commentary team were talking about it. We're like, okay, Bueno Silva, in theory, won the first round. But because of technicalities of the referee giving the -1 point, we can say first round was a draw. Second round, Del Rosa obviously wins with, I think, about 2.5 minutes, or nearly 3 minutes of ground control action happening in the second round. Third round, Del Rosa was able to get a takedown in, but Bueno Silva was able to get back up, and she won, without a doubt, decisively in the striking exchanges here. Which led to First round should go to Bueno Silva. Second round then goes to De La Rosa. Third round then goes to Bueno Silva. And that's how the judge scorecard was, with the exception of one judge who scored the second round in favor of Bueno Silva, with Bueno Silva winning all 3 rounds. Which, once again, understandable, considering that Bueno Silva, when she was taken down to the ground, she was never in a position where she was ever threatened to be finished. She was never in a position. And I'm a firm believer that if you are... my mind changes all the time about this. But I'm a firm believer that if you are a fighter and you are preventing your opponent from finishing you, or you're keeping your opponent at bay, to which De La Rosa was stuck at like half-guard position for about almost 3 minutes when she was grappling with Miranda Silva. Now, De La Rosa was being active in that she's constantly trying to move over to side control, or constantly try to move over to mount position, which is why the referee didn't stop it. But for the most part, De La Rosa was stuck in half-guard position for the majority of the time when she did implement ground control on Bueno Silva. I picked De La Rosa winning the second round, but it was understandable as to why why a judge or a person can believe, like, yeah, Bueno Silva, she won second round because De La Rosa, despite having ground control, really didn't do much with the control that she was given. And you're like, okay. With that being said, it was a draw. And I hate draws. Draws rarely happen. And the reason why I don't like draws is because, yes, both these fighters, they got a good payday, but what about the rankings here? Like, the women's fight division is unanimously agreed upon being the weakest division, other than the women's featherweight division, that people don't really count all that much because it's not really a division, because there's no one there in terms of, like, there's no top 15 rankings in the women's featherweight division. So, other than the featherweight division, women's fight division, unanimously agreed upon as the weakest division. Valentina Shevchenko is the fighter who is least likely to lose their belt anytime soon, unless she's matched up with Jessica Andrade. But if she defeats Jessica Andrade, then definitely she's going to go on this like huge reign of terror. And the only way Valentina Shevchenko will ever lose the belt if she vacates it. That's how weak the women's fight division is. We got prospects in the women's fight division, but none of them are in the top 10. So we're at a point now where we want to see change. We want to see stuff happen in the women's fight division. And with this draw, nothing matters. Nothing happens. No one changes their rankings. Bueno Silva came to this fight 7-1. If the point deduction never happened, it would have been 8-1, which could have put her high up in the top 10 rankings, which could have led to even more excitement happening in the division, or whatever excitement's left for that division. And I started thinking about something else, where whenever Cormier and Cruz, whenever they do commentary, they keep saying the fighter on defense should be able to use the cage to help them up. And now I'm questioning that. I understand what they're saying, in the sense that if your opponent is trying to take you down, you can press your body back onto the cage, and you can prevent the takedown. And then from then on, you can hypothetically switch positions with your opponent on the clinching, which happens, but it doesn't happen against high level, like supremely high level, championship level wrestlers. Like, you can't do that on some certain fighters. Like, you can't do that on you can't do that on Valentina. You can't do that on Carla Esparza. You can't do that on even someone like Jessica Andrade, where the second they clinch with you, is your back is on the cage. Your back is on the cage, and you just pretty much have to wait it out until the referee is like, all right then, nothing's happening. All right, meet each other back in the center of the octagon here. All right. So it's a strange scenario where you're supposed to use a cage as a defensive fighter to stop the takedowns, to stop the clinching, to defend yourself. And if you do get taken down, you can use the cage. You can use the cage with your back in order to like hoist up your legs and knees to go use it as leverage to get yourself back up, but you're not allowed to go hold on to the fence. And it's understandable as to why you can't use the fence, because if you can just hold on to the fence the entire time, then there's absolutely no point in wrestling over there, because then you almost never get takedown in. Alright? But I'm still really confused. I'm really confused as to why this... She should not have been given a negative point. Should not have been given a negative point. I think young fighters are going to be confused about usage of the cage in terms of defensive grappling. That's what I believe. What is the future for Montana Rosa and Bueno Silva? Well, looking at the rankings here, Bueno Silva, she is at the time, currently right now, ranked number 17. She is 2-1-1 in her UFC career because of the draw. Could have been 3-1, which could have really pulled her up. One matchup that I definitely do want to see is Miranda Silva versus Talia Santos. And I see this all the time, where I'm always saying like, oh man, this fight could be like fight of the night or fight of the year candidate. I believe that. I legitimately do believe that if we had two strikers in Talia Santos and Miranda Silva go at it, it would be fireworks. It would be a show full of fireworks, full of high-octane, consistent, high-paced action. In every bout with Talia Santos, she has incredibly high volume of striking. And when you look at the fight stats here, where we have Montana Rosa landing 107 out of 156 total strikes, landing 30 of 72 significant strikes, compared that to Bueno Silva, who landed an astounding 78% of her strikes, 111 out of 142. She lands nearly 80% of her strikes, 52 of 80. I am shocked and surprised here of the fight stats, showing how close it was. Even the commentary team, when they saw the graphics showing in the bottom left hand of the screen, showing the stats for both fighters here, it really looked like Bueno Silva was the one dominating De La Rosa in the striking category, which, based off the eye test, she kind of was here. But it is one of those scenarios where De La Rosa, she lands like quick jabs and like soft strikes just to set her up for a grappling exchange. And those are counted as full strikes though. Now they're not counted significant strikes, which is why Bueno Silva ended up landing 22 more. But in the strikes that Bueno Silva landed, she obviously was a hard hitter. Bueno Silva was the one engaging in the activity, in the striking, and she hit significantly a lot more harder than De La Rosa, but the fight stats say as if, oh man, both these fighters are fairly equal. No! It really wasn't the case there. It really wasn't the case. Bueno Silva, based on the eye test, was the better striker. Even in numbers, she was a better striker. Second round was iffy, but then again, sir, do you score a fighter a round, or do you give a fighter props for defending takedowns or defending themselves in ground control? I'm not really sure there. If fighter B gets to... Okay, it's a lot like Mayra Davishvili and John Dodson. Like, Davishvili gets a takedown on John Dodson. Dodson immediately stands up within a matter of like 5 seconds. Do you reward the takedown still on Davishvili, even though the takedown really didn't lead to anything else? I'm not really sure. Should you be rewarded for takedowns if you're not really being active and you did control your opponent or ground and pound them or put them in a position where they could potentially lose? I'm not really sure there. I really am not. And that's what happened in the second round for De La Rosa. Now, for the future of both these fighters, I'm not sure for De La Rosa. Miranda Silva versus Talia Santos, that's a fight that I'm incredibly hyped up for and excited. And as I am looking at the UFC Women's Fight rankings, where things have shifted and changed, it still makes very little sense. There's a lot of inconsistencies happening in the Women's Fight division. Sally De La Rosa, she will not be moving up the rankings as a result of the draw. The same thing also applies for Bueno Silva. But as we look forward for the year 2021, expect big things to have happened for the Women's Fight division, as hopefully things will be a lot more dynamic, a lot more diverse, and there'll be a lot more activity happening in this division. You're listening to the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast. Come back after the short break here as I discuss the Women's Fight division. See you soon.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
And we're back. You're listening to the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, and we're in the news brief portion of the podcast here. So before I get into the Women's Fight division, first up, Alexis Davis versus Sabina Mazzo It's a women's bantamweight bout that happened in the prelims of the UFC Fight Night event with Rosa versus Cecilia Gans. And in that fight there, it was a complete domination by the veteran here in Alexis Davis. She landed 128 out of 196 total strikes. 49 of 83. Now you compare that, though, to Sabina Mazzo, who landed only 71 of 173 strikes. But the story of this fight here was the grappling, the wrestling of Alexis Davis. And that she completely controlled Sabina Mazzo. Mazzo's grappling was very green, and led to Alexis Davis winning in both ends of the fight here, showing her complete all-around MMA game, which gave her the decision victory, by unanimous decision. She is now 20-10 in her overall MMA career, and she is propelling herself up in the women's bantamweight rankings. So once again, congratulations for Alexis Davis there. I don't want to go in depth about that fight because it was an obvious one-sided fight where Alexis Davis was pretty much winning out in every aspect of the fight. Now, I will say this, Mazzo, she is definitely the harder hitter between the two, but Alexis Davis was too overwhelming on her in the striking and the grappling that it was an easy unanimous decision victory in favor of Alexis Davis. So, congratulations for both fighters for coming away with the payday. Congratulations for Alexis Davis for coming out with the victory. And now we look at the women's flyweight rankings here, a division that I am incredibly critical of. And it is made official as we are having Valentina Shevchenko fighting against Jessica Andrade, not Lauren Murphy, as it was expected to happen. It will be Jessica Andrade versus Valentina Shevchenko happening on April 24, 2021. This is, as how I view it, the biggest and most important fights in the fight division. It is. Because what's the strange thing about Jessica Andrade, though, is the fact that prior to her fight with Katlyn Chookagian, was off a 2-fight losing streak. But once again, she lost to Zhang Weili, Rosa Namajunas. Understandable as to why she lose against those two, considering the level of talent those two women are. They'll be competing for the women's title soon, and will be a barn burner bout in the near future. But Jessica Andrade, she made her debut at flyweight, defeated Katlyn Chookagian, who was ranked number 2 for the longest time in the women's fight rankings. So now we're going to see Andrade versus Valentina. Jessica Andrade versus Valentina. Andrade is one of those fighters that, based on fight theory, should not be winning her fights, but she does though. Jessica Andrade is one of those fighters that, if the atomweight division were to exist and Jessica Andrade were to be in it, which I can see happening, Andrade has competed at bantamweight, at flyweight, and at strawweight. And at strawweight, she was a complete juggernaut in that division. She can easily go and make a 105-pound division at atomweight, and if that exists, oh my goodness, Jessica Andrade, you might as well give her the belt there, because she would go and steamroll every woman in the division. She really would. And now for Jessica Andrade versus Valentina Shevchenko here, we have to talk about her fight against Katlyn Chookagian, because there'll be some similarities here, in the sense that, going to the battle against Chookagian, the general consensus was, alright, Katlyn Chookagian should, in theory, defeat against Jessica Andrade. She should, because she's bigger, she's stronger, has the greater reach, a lot more stronger, a lot more powerful. So, yeah, Katlyn Chookagian should defeat Andrade, because Andrade, some people speculated, including myself, that she's been desensitized competing in strawweights, so she won't be able to adjust to the size differential at flyweight. And guess what? We were all wrong. Jessica Andrade, not only did she overpower Katlyn Chookagian in the clinching, she knocked her out. She knocked out Katlyn Chookagian. Jessica Andrade is deceptively one of the most powerful girls in all the UFC, and without a doubt, easily will be the most strongest woman Valentina has ever fought in the fight division. No doubt about that. So for Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica Andrade, how I'm predicting this fight? Well, I'm gonna go by fight theory. Valentina Shevchenko is definitively way more better than Katlyn Chookagian. And here's the thing, with Valentina in her bout against Jennifer Maia, there was one round Jennifer Maia won, but other than the one round though, Valentina Shevchenko, kind of like Amanda Nunes, is one of those fighters who's developed that all-around MMA game that has made her a complete terror in the division. She can go throughout high leg kicks, her kickboxing is elite level S tier, and if she wants to, she can grapple with you. And the same thing applies to Jessica Andrade. But whenever I do see fighters move up in rankings, I'm just naturally have to be alright, the fighter who is more stabilized in the division usually wins. That's how I usually say it. It's the reason why I believe Jan Blachowicz will go defeat Izzo Adesanya. Is because Izzo Adesanya is moving up from middleweight to the light heavy division. And Valentina, yes, Jessica Andrade, she has defeated Clint Chikagian, and she has at one point competed at bantamweight. But Valentina is a unique breed in herself. Jessica Andrade has never fought anybody who is as talented as Valentina Shevchenko. Maybe Zhang Weili. It would be a dream fight to see Zhang Weili versus Valentina Shevchenko on who is pound for pound the hardest hitters or who are the best strikers in the UFC. I'll love to see that. But for Andrade versus Valentina Shevchenko, Valentina, her strike, her reach advantage, her striking, her utilization of leg kicks, that's the difference between Valentina Shevchenko and Killian Chikagian. Killian Chikagian fights a very traditional boxing stance, and she's got, she's basic, all-around MMA fighter in Chikagian. Valentina, her kickboxing is elite tier high level, and what we're going to see from this bout here, what I predict, is Jessica Andrade is going to go and pressure fight her opponent. She's going to go pressure Valentina. If Valentina is able to utilize her leg kicks, her high leg kicks, her body kicks, and utilize and maximize her reach, she'll be able to push away and body. Oh, no, by the way, Valentina has really good push kicks also. She'll be able to do push kicks on Jessica Andrade, preventing Andrade from making the fight to be a complete barn burner. Because if Jessica Andrade, the only way Jessica Andrade will win this bout here is if she closes the gap between herself and Valentina, makes to a bout where they're fighting within the close range, and then they're going to go through a 50-50 exchange, and Jessica Andrade, typically in those exchanges, for the most part, usually wins. That's how she wins. She goes full steam, full power, one direction, going straight at her opponents, and then she overwhelms them, and then she gets the clean shot and wins the bout. Now, last time that didn't pan out well for her in her fight against Zhang Weili, where Jessica Andrade came to the fight being like, okay, I can overpower my opponent here, I'm going to apply the pressure on my opponent, and then Zhang Weili is able to go and counter her with a knockout punch on Andrade. And the same thing can also apply for Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica Andrade here. The way how I predicted, Andrade pressures her opponent, and if Valentina fails in utilizing her leg kicks and push kicks to go keep her away from Jessica Andrade, there is a scenario where Valentina is able to go sidestep away from Jessica Andrade and is able to go find a clear shot on Jessica Andrade. Because one thing I noticed about Jessica Andrade's offense is the fact that when she goes full throttle, like going aggro aggression mode, trying to pummel her opponents, trying to make it to a scrap fight, she leaves herself open. And in her bout against Killian Chikagian was too overwhelmed, and she couldn't find or put herself in a position to go find the correct angling of her counter strike, which led to Killian Chikagian getting knocked out. Valentina Shevchenko is one of those high IQ fighters who I can see spotting that opening of when Jessica Andrade comes into her range, and Valentina could potentially knock out Jessica Andrade. Or here's another alternate case here. Jessica Andrade could be diving towards the direction of Valentina, or tries to go pressure or clinch work with her onto the cage, and Valentina doubles down for a takedown and tries to control Jessica Andrade onto the ground. I'll say this, the clinch work of Jessica Andrade is really darn good, incredibly impressive, and Valentina Shevchenko needs to avoid clinching with Jessica Andrade. But Jessica Andrade's grappling her wrestling onto the ground is kind of skeptical, kind of sus. So if Jessica Andrade clinches with Valentina, it's a bad position for Valentina. But if Valentina can go and prevent the clinch from happening and instead shoots in for a takedown, then Valentina could win this fight through maintaining her cardio, through just pressuring her opponent with the wrestling, with the grappling, for 5 rounds of action. Now, will the fight end up by decision? I'm not really sure. This is one of those bouts here that could end in the first round, early second round, or even by decision. This is one of those coin toss fights where you really are unsure on who will win the fight. I'm saying that Valentina Shevchenko will defeat Jessica Andrade. Valentina is going to come in as a favorite. It's understandable as to why that would happen. But Valentina Shevchenko, when they do fight coming up April 24, it will definitely be the biggest fight to happen in the women's fight division. And then we have Killian Chikagian, after defeating Cynthia Calvillo, who was a fighter that I and many other people were really high on. She is matched up against Viviane Araújo. So we got number 3 ranked Killian Chikagian against number 9 ranked Viviane Araújo. Viviane Araújo is coming off a victory over both Matanda Rosa and Roxanne Modafferi. So that will be another gatekeeper fight for Killian Chikagian. We also have Antina Shevchenko, the sister of Valentina, fighting against Andrea Lee. I am shocked, honestly, that Andrea Lee is given an opportunity to fight against somebody who is So Antonina is not top 10. She's ranked number 11. And consider that Andrea Lee, she has not had a good run lately. She's been going through a losing streak as of late. Andrea Lee is somebody that the UFC was really high on like some years ago, but things didn't pan out well. So this essentially is a bout between two fighters who the UFC was really high on, and things are not panning out well for them, so they're matched up against one another. If Andrea Lee is able to pull off the upset victory here, which I doubt she will, because Antonina has been like working on her game, because she came in as kickboxer to now somebody who can actually grapple with you as a way to tear you to make you tired, tear you down slowly, and then second round go in for knockouts. That's Antonina now. She's developed that all-around game, which is really good for her. No matchups for Alexis Grasso, surprisingly enough, though. I thought the UFC would go push her soon. We have Julian Robertson versus Miranda Maverick. Their fight was initially scheduled this past month, but that fight ended up being scrapped, and now it's being set up again for the month of May. I'm looking at the rest of the year. Andrea Lee. I'm looking at my rankings here. You're not going to see Andrea Lee's name pop up in the UFC.com rankings because they only go from 1 through 15. But Andrea Lee jumped from like number 8 to like number 12 to like number 22 now from Rankings MMA. Because Rankings MMA, it shows all the fighters that go beyond the top 15 rankings. So Andrea Lee, huge opportunity for her. This is a must win for her because Andrea Lee right now, she is going through a 3-fight losing streak, losing to Roxanne Modafferi, Lauren Murphy, and Joanne Calderwood. And oh my goodness, looking at the competition that she had to go face, she fought against 3 top 10 fighters. Of course, Andrea Lee was formerly a top 10 fighter. There were even expectations that Andrea Lee could have been a top 5 fighter and fought for the title, but it just didn't pan out that way. Montanda Rosa, she's stuck at 3-1 right now in her UFC career. JJ Aldrich will be facing against Courtney Casey coming up next week at a UFC Fight Night event. You have Gina Mazzani against Priscilla Cachoya. Jeon Kim against Poliana Botelho. That is a fight that I am really high on. So, Poliana Botelho is one of those fighters that, although her record is only 3-2, she has a high ceiling, a very high ceiling, and her striking ability is very high and is really underrated. So, Botelho against Jeon Kim. Jeon Kim, there has been spurts of her. So, Jeon Kim is a fighter who just struggles making weights. And if she can get her conditioning or her health down precisely, the best version of Jeon Kim should definitely be a top 10 fighter. I'm that high on Jeon Kim. I'm also that high on Botelho. So, those are 2 fighters who are in the 20th ranking scale, who are desperate in need of win. Maria Gapova, who prior to this was outside the top 15 rankings, and then she lost to Shayna Dobson, and now in the rankings on MMA.com, she's now ranked number 30, and she was like 1 step above Jeon Kim. So the fight rankings outside of the top 15, there's a lot of like people moving up and down. We got prospects who are dropping down. We have fighters who don't have all that impressive records, with either losing records or at 500 records, now being at the doorstep of being part of the top 15. And even if you look at the top 10 rankings here, you got fighters with losing records and like subpar 500. It's so strange. For instance, Miranda Maverick. Miranda Maverick is ranked number 13, yet she is 1-0 in her UFC career, defeating against Lilian Ahua, who is nowhere even near in the top 20 rankings. It's confusing, ain't it? The UFC is desperately looking for that next big breakout star for the women's fight division. It could be Jessica Andrade. It could be Jessica Andrade if she were to defeat Valentina. I'd like to see a lot more mix-up happening in the fight division. I would love to see Valentina compete yet again at the women's bantamweight division. Of course, Valentina, she lost to Amanda Nunes, but I think if we were to see Amanda Nunes versus Valentina again, that could be fireworks. There are a lot of people who want to see that fight happen again. Dana White has shut that fight down because in his mind, he's like, okay, Valentina lost to Amanda Nunes. I don't see Valentina defeating Amanda Nunes then if she already lost, so it's not going to happen. I think Valentina should give bantamweight another chance, give that division another chance to go and give it a try again against Nunes for the bantamweight title. I would love to see that because right now the women's fight rankings is very stale, and I will be cheering for Andrade to defeat Shevchenko. Not because I'm a hater for Shevchenko, because I just want to see a lot more diversity and a lot more activity happening in the division. And so with that being said, that ends off the news brief portion of the podcast. All I gotta say is thank you. You have been an awesome audience. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Women's MMA Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Women's Mixed Martial Arts Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.